The word echoed in the opulent silence of the restaurant long after he said it. It hung in the air between the crystal glasses and polished brass, a stain on the carefully curated atmosphere. My sister's husband, Julian, smirked as if he'd just delivered a clever punchline. The rest of them, my family, the Sterlings, just watched. They watched the way they always did, with a chilling passivity that was more damning than any overt act of cruelty. They had already erased my name from legal documents, from family group chats, from the guilt-framed photos lining their marble hallways. They had even managed to edit me out of my own mother's will. But what truly broke something inside me wasn't being left out. It was the slow, dawning horror that they had planned it all meticulously, as if erasing a person was just another line item on a corporate agenda. Why would your own family go to such lengths, just to make you feel like a ghost in your own life? I had arrived 15 minutes late to the restaurant in Bellevue, a gleaming temple of glass and shadows overlooking Lake Washington. The valet, a young man with an indifferent expression, didn't recognize me and had to ask twice who I was there to see. I mumbled something about a reservation under Sterling, and he handed me a ticket with the detached air of someone dealing with a party crasher. The moment I stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. It was a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air outside. It was the cold front of non-recognition. At a long table behind a gold-framed arch, they sat. The Sterlings, a perfect tableau of dynastic power. My sister Serafina was the radiant centerpiece in a navy-sheath dress. Julian was beside her, wearing that practiced predatory grin like a piece of armor. Their daughter, my niece, leaned over and whispered something, her lips curling into a smirk. As I drew closer, that smirk solidified into words, sharp and clear enough to cut through the restaurant's low hum. "That's her," she said, not bothering to lower her voice. "The one Mom's helping, like a charity case." I stopped. My heels clicked once, a sound that felt deafening on the polished floor. A smile formed on my lips out of pure, conditioned reflex, the kind of polite grimace you make when a stranger steps on your foot. No one turned to greet me, not even Serafina. I approached the nearest waiter, my voice a low, steady tremor. "Hi, I believe there should be a seat for me at the Sterling party." He hesitated, his eyes flicking towards the back. Then Julian was there, moving with the purposeful stride of a man who owned every room he entered. "Cora," he said, his tone one a person might reserve for a persistent insect. "Didn't expect you." "I RSVP'd," I said softly. He laughed. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, and it carried. "Maybe next time confirm with someone who matters." Then turning to the waiter, to the nearby tables, to the entire room, he projected his voice. "I'm sorry, we don't serve beggars here. Perhaps she should check the shelter downtown." Laughter followed. Muted, polite, but it was unmistakably laughter. I didn't flinch, I didn't cry. I simply nodded once, a gesture of finality, and walked past him as if I had been on my way to the restroom all along. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the cage of my body, but my face was a mask of placid indifference. No one followed. I found a quiet corner near a window that overlooked a dark, manicured courtyard. I stared at my own reflection in the glass, a woman too well dressed to be pitied, yet too invisible to be welcomed. This had happened before, in smaller, more insidious ways. The missed invitations, the photos I was conveniently cropped out of, the group messages I was never added to. But this was different. This was a public declaration of my non-existence. I thought of my mother, how she used to say, "Family holds you up when the world turns away." She hadn't lived long enough to see this version of her family. Or maybe she had, and had simply chosen to look away. I stood there long enough to hear the clinking of glasses for toasts I wasn't a part of, long enough to smell the seared scallops I wouldn't be served, long enough to feel a profound sense of erasure settle into my bones like a second skin. When I finally turned to leave, I didn't make a scene. That would have given them the satisfaction. I walked out into the cool, damp Pacific Northwest air, my heels tapping a rhythm of retreat. In the quiet anonymity of my car, I reached into my purse and my fingers found it. A small, sealed envelope I'd received months ago and almost forgotten. Tonight, I held it like a weapon. "Not again," I whispered to the empty car. I didn't go home. I drove aimlessly until I found myself parked at the edge of Lake Sammamish. The water was dark and still, reflecting the distant, indifferent lights of the city. The truth is, you don't need to be told you're not wanted. Sometimes, they just stop making space for you. The thought replayed in my head, a quiet, damning hymn. Earlier that week, Serafina's assistant had delivered a new family photo album, a heavy white linen box tied with a satin ribbon. I hadn't asked for it. I flipped through the glossy pages, a curated history of holidays and vacations, and confirmed what my gut already knew. In every photo where I should have been, I was a ghost, blurred in the background of a Christmas portrait. My face cropped out of a summer photo, leaving only my hand visible on the arm of a chair. The final page was a full spread titled, "The Sterlings, Our Legacy." I wasn't there. Not as an aunt, not as a sister. It wasn't an oversight. It was a revision. They weren't just forgetting me. They were methodically, strategically erasing me. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my home office, surrounded by papers I had buried years ago, contracts, signatures, financial records I wasn't supposed to have kept. They were a map leading back to everything they had tried to take. If I had no seat at their table, I whispered to the quiet room, I would build one they couldn't ignore. That was the night I stopped grieving a family and started auditing one. The clock glowed past midnight, but my mind was sharp, fueled by a clarity that was colder and more potent than rage. In a battered box labeled Taxes 2009, I found the green folder. Inside were my mother's original estate documents, the ones I had scanned and annotated in the raw, grief-stricken week after she passed. Section 4 stated clearly that a portion of the family estate was left to me, Cora Valerius. My name, typed and clean. But I remembered the funeral, the lawyer reading a revised will that had no Section 4. The signature on the document he'd read was dated 3 days before her death. The signature on my original copy was dated and notarized weeks before she was even hospitalized. My heart thudded a slow, heavy rhythm. It wasn't just an omission, it was a forgery. By 2:00 a.m., I had emailed Ms. Evelyn Reed, a paralegal who used to work for my mother's attorney. Evelyn, do you know if any revisions were made to my mother's will in the final 30 days before she passed? The reply was waiting in my inbox by morning. Cora, you may want to check the remote access logs for her attorney's portal. Something was amended on a Saturday night. That's all I can say. I grabbed my planner. That particular weekend, I'd been in Toronto for a work trip, with no cell reception. The same weekend they told me she'd been moved to hospice. The same weekend they buried her before I could even get home. While I was unreachable, someone had rewritten my history. I didn't have to guess who. The next day, I drove to the Sterling estate. Serafina was in Palm Springs on a wellness retreat, her Instagram a testament to her curated serenity. The housekeeper, Marissa, still fond of me from years past, let me in. I told her I was there to pick up some books my mother had promised me. I wandered the halls until I reached the portrait wall, a museum of their manufactured legacy. In a photo from the 90s, I was half hidden behind Serafina. In a Thanksgiving shot, only 3 plates were visible at the table, though I distinctly remembered being there. Then I saw the legacy wall. 6 massive canvas portraits, Serafina and Julian at the center, their daughter, Julian's parents, and my own father, no me. I ran my fingers along a cold, sharp frame. When Marissa reappeared, she smiled hesitantly. "Find what you were looking for?" Almost, I said. Just checking the archives. Back home, I opened my journal and wrote a single sentence. They didn't forget me. They deleted me. And then I opened the folder I swore I'd never use again, the one filled with papers stiff from years of neglect. Names, numbers, power of attorney memos I'd signed through a blur of tears when my mother died, not understanding what they were taking from me. A cold resolve settled deep in my chest. I called my Aunt Beatrice, hoping for an ally, for someone to say, "This isn't right." "I heard you made quite the scene at dinner," she said, her voice heavy with disapproval. "Aunt Beatrice, did Mom ever mention changing her will toward the end? Deline, she was dying. You need to stop digging. It's disgraceful. You sound so ungrateful." Ungrateful, as if gratitude was the price for my silence. I hung up. The call to the attorney's office was just as fruitless. "We've been instructed to work only through the executor, Miss A." Serafina Sterling, a receptionist, informed me coolly. "You are not listed in the final document, Miss Valerius." That night, I didn't rage. I opened a spreadsheet. Bank records, land titles, joint accounts I had once been authorized on, but was now mysteriously removed from. I called my bank, transferred my personal savings into a new trust, and set up a meeting with a financial advisor. I dug out a dusty folder labeled Trust Docs 2016. If they were going to pretend I didn't exist, I'd make sure the very land they built their lies on remembered exactly who owned the soil beneath it. They locked me out of the house. I would buy the land it stood on. At 4:17 a.m., I recorded a voicemail, my voice calm, composed, and deadly. "Serafina, I don't want to fight you, but if you keep pretending I'm not here, I will become impossible to ignore." When they locked me out, they forgot I still had the blueprints. 2 mornings later, I logged into the investor dashboard for a company they'd all forgotten I ever touched, Ethelred Innovations. A decade ago, I'd scraped together a small seed investment. They had laughed at me then. "Tech isn't your lane, Cora," Serafina had said. Now, Ethelred was nearing its IPO, valued at just over $900 million. My phone buzzed. A calendar reminder I set 2 years ago. Review Draycott Holdings, tax partnerships. Draycott was the Sterling family's primary holding company. Even my own reminders were more loyal than my blood. I opened an email to Ethelred's legal team. Subject: Board Access Clarification. Urgent. Initiate transfer of all Ethelred investment assets out of Draycott Holdings. Redirect to 3R Capital Management effective immediately. The reply was swift. Understood, Miss Valerius. You still retain majority voting rights. Still retain. They hadn't stripped me of everything. Not yet. I remembered a lunch with Julian 2 years ago. "Some of the contracts, I've just gone ahead and updated them for you," he'd said with a magnanimous smile. "Less for you to worry about." Control disguised as concern. I printed the formal notice, intent to reclaim all jointly held investments, initiated by Cora Valerius. My phone buzzed again, an invite from Serafina's assistant, Family Legacy Estate Meeting. I tapped Accept and whispered, "Let's see how you behave when you think you've already won." The morning of the meeting, they made their move. I tried to log into my personal bank account. Access restricted. I tried the joint legacy fund my mother had set up. Access restricted. The bank's chat support confirmed it. As per instructions from the estate's executor, all modifications must be authorized by the designated representative. Serafina. I checked the family group chat. It was gone. Not just muted, deleted from my phone as if it never existed. I stood up and walked to my office. No anger, just action. I created a new folder on my secure drive. Prep Alpha 1B. I dropped in screenshots of the errors, the chat logs, the will timeline. I opened a portal to shell companies I'd set up 10 years ago. a prescient act of self-preservation, and began rerouting assets through untraceable entities. Then I drafted a cease and desist letter, cold and precise, and sent it to Serafina's inbox, CCing the family's legal team. This is not a warning, it is a declaration. That night, an unknown number called. A robotic voice, flat and mechanical. "We know what you're doing. You've made this personal." "I was born into this," I said calmly. "You made it personal the day you rewrote my name." Then came the leak, an internal brief from Draycott Holdings, forwarded to me by a nervous ally at Ethelred. "In light of recent tensions, we wish to express our concern for Ms. Decora Valerius's health. Recent behaviors suggest a pattern of emotional instability. They called me fragile. And they misspelled my last name, a subtle surgical trick to invalidate my legal standing. Attached were screenshots of private messages. "She's never been quite right," one read. "I'm doing what's best for her." Read another from Serafina. They were painting me not as an adversary, but as an invalid. I didn't explain. I exposed. I had Ethelred's legal team issue a statement. Founder and financial visionary Cora Valerius remains fully operational. It was a quiet countermove, but for those watching, it was enough. The night before the meeting, an anonymous email arrived. "Nice try, but they're already painting you out of the picture again. This time faster." I replied with a single line, "Let them paint. I'm about to change the whole canvas." The Draycott Holdings boardroom was a stage built for curated power. I walked in at 9:58 a.m. and connected my laptop to the conference screen. The first slide appeared, Estate Timeline Verification Discrepancy Log. I began, my voice measured and precise, walking them through a chronological breakdown of every legal document, every signature's metadata, every IP address. Then came the image of the power of attorney document Lester claimed I signed at 21. "This signature," I said calmly, "was supposedly done on a day I was in Milan. Here is my boarding pass, a time-stamped photo from the event, and the transcript of the keynote I gave that afternoon." Silence. Then the screen shifted to the Ethelred Innovations dashboard. "I'd like to show you the status of Trust Account 2N7A, I said. "Today, it holds $1 billion in assets." I paused. One click. "Transfer initiated." The screen blinked. Confirmation. "Transferred to 3R Capital Holdings. In my name, in full." The oxygen left the room. "This isn't what Mom intended," Serafina finally whispered. I looked straight at her. "No, it's exactly what she prepared me for." "You just thought I'd never wake up." The meeting ended without adjournment. They filed out in silence. As I packed my things, a junior executive slid a folded note across the table. "They're planning something. Watch your back." I just nodded. I'd already flipped the table. In the days that followed, Serafina stepped down from the board, citing a need to focus on her wellness. At a charity gala, I was publicly snubbed. My name skipped over during the recognition ceremony. Their final move, if they couldn't defeat me, they would dilute me, pretend I was peripheral. But silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's proof of a victory too total to argue over. A week later, the package arrived. A USB drive with a sticker in my mother's handwriting. For her only. On it was a grainy video. "Cora," my mother said, her voice faint but firm, "I know they've made you feel like a shadow. But you are the light that keeps this family real." Then a letter, delivered by my stepfather, written the week before she lost her voice. "I left instructions for you to lead. If they don't listen, take what's yours. They will try to erase you. But you were always the one who knew where the foundation cracked." I didn't cry. I placed the video and the letter in a wooden box, proof that I hadn't imagined the warmth. that the cold came later. The next day, I received an email. You've been nominated to speak at the National Women's Leadership Conference. You were recommended by someone who believes in quiet power. I clicked accept. The story was beginning again, this time on my terms. The ballroom was nothing like the spaces I'd fought in before. It was a sea of unfamiliar faces who weren't interested in family trees, but in what you'd grown through. When my name was called, spelled correctly, I walked to the podium. I never wanted a war, I began, my voice even. I only wanted a seat. When none was offered, I built the table. I spoke not of betrayal, but of strategy, of the quiet strength that outlasts noise. They called me unstable because I didn't scream, I said, my voice steadying. They called me ungrateful because I didn't bow. I paused. There was a man who once looked me in the face and said, "We don't serve beggars." Funny, I said, a slow, real smile touching my lips. Now they all line up to serve me. Sustained, rolling applause followed me off the stage. I traveled home the next day. The heaviness was gone, replaced by something steadier. Not pride, not peace, but place. I didn't just survive them. I outgrew them. This wasn't the end of a name. It was the start of a legacy. Sometimes the loudest power is the one that doesn't shout. It simply refuses to disappear. I didn't win because I screamed louder. I won because I stayed standing long after the shouting stopped. Your value doesn't come from who claps for you. It comes from knowing deeply and quietly who you are when no one is watching. To anyone out there who has ever been erased, overlooked, or rewritten by someone else's fear, you are not alone. Maybe you're the quiet one in the back, building your own table while everyone else fights for a seat. Speak when you're ready, and speak in a way they can't ignore. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been made to feel invisible by the people who should have seen you most? Let's start a conversation in the comments. If this story resonated, drop a 1 or let me know where you're watching from. If it didn't land, tell me why. I'm here to listen. And if this story touched you, please subscribe. More stories are coming. One's about quiet strength, second chances, and the power of not giving up. I'll see you there.